My name is Alice, and 3 months ago I watched my older brother Tyler steal everything that should have been mine. I'm talking about an $800,000 Victorian home in Portland, a vintage jewelry collection worth more than most people's cars, and a 1967 Mustang that our grandmother had promised would be mine since I was 12 years old. What made it worse wasn't just the theft itself. It was the gold-embossed invitation that arrived in my mailbox weeks later, inviting me to his inheritance celebration at the most exclusive country club in Lake Oswego. Tyler wanted me there to watch him toast his victory over champagne and caviar, surrounded by Portland's elite who had no idea they were celebrating fraud. But here's what Tyler didn't know. While he was busy planning his party, I had been planning something too. You see, I'd spent those 3 months hiring a private investigator who specialized in elder fraud cases. What we discovered made my blood run cold. This wasn't just about changing a will. This was about systematic manipulation, forged documents, and a conspiracy that reached far beyond anything I could have imagined. Before I tell you how I stood up at that country club and destroyed my brother's reputation in front of everyone who mattered to him, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button for his revenge with Alice. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for what happened when I revealed the truth about how Tyler really got that money. The night I confronted him changed everything. Not just for Tyler, but for an entire network of people who thought they could prey on vulnerable elderly victims without consequence. What I uncovered that night would make headlines across Oregon and send multiple people to prison. But to understand why my revenge was so devastating, you need to know where this all began. Walking out of that lawyer's office on Southwest Morrison, I felt like someone had ripped my heart out and stomped on it. But underneath the grief and shock, something else was gnawing at me. A voice in my head that wouldn't shut up, telling me this wasn't right. Grandma Rose had shown me that at least 20 times over the years. Every Christmas, every birthday, every time we sat in her sunroom overlooking the garden she'd planted herself. She would pull out that manila folder from her antique desk and point to the line where my name was written next to the house deed. "This is yours, Alice," she'd say, her weathered finger tracing the words. "This house knows your footsteps. It belongs with you." The woman I knew would never have changed her mind without telling me. Not the grandmother who called me every Tuesday at exactly 7 p.m. to check on my shifts at the hospital. Not the woman who still remembered every detail about my terrible breakup with Michael 2 years ago and made sure to ask about my dating life with genuine concern, not obligation. But Tyler had been her primary caregiver those final 6 months. I was working 12-hour shifts in the cardiac unit at OHSU, coming by on weekends when I could manage it. I trusted him. God help me. I actually trusted him to take care of the woman who raised us both. The more I replayed those final weeks, the more details stood out like red flags I'd been too exhausted to notice. Grandma asking me the same questions multiple times during visits. Her confusion about bills she'd always handled herself. The way Tyler would hover whenever I tried to have a private conversation with her, always finding some excuse to interrupt. Most telling was the last time I'd asked about the will. 2 weeks before she died, I'd mentioned wanting to understand the property taxes, so I could plan ahead. Grandma had looked at me with genuine confusion and said, "What house, dear?" When I reminded her about her promise, she'd gotten agitated and claimed she didn't remember making any such arrangement. Tyler had swooped in immediately, suggesting she was tired and needed rest, i.e. the time. I'd attributed it to her age and grief over declining health. Now, those moments felt like puzzle pieces clicking into place. 3 days after the will reading, I called my friend David from nursing school. His cousin Vincent ran a private investigation firm specializing in financial fraud cases, particularly those involving elderly victims. David had mentioned Vincent's work during one of our coffee dates, talking about how elder abuse was becoming increasingly sophisticated. "Alice, I'm sorry for your loss," Vincent said when I finally worked up the courage to call. His voice was warm but professional. "David told me about your situation. I'll be honest with you up front. These cases are complicated and expensive. Most families don't want to believe a relative would manipulate an elderly person, especially when that person seemed willing. I explained my suspicions, from Tyler's increasing control to Grandma's sudden memory issues. Vincent listened without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions about timelines and specific incidents. What you're describing fits a pattern, he said finally. But I need you to understand something before we proceed. If Tyler did manipulate your grandmother, we're not just talking about changing a will. We're talking about systematic, psychological manipulation, possibly medication tampering, and potentially years of financial abuse. Are you prepared for what we might find? The question hit me harder than I expected. Was I prepared to discover that my only remaining family member was a predator? That he'd spent months, or maybe years, systematically destroying the mind of the woman who'd saved us both after our parents died? But the alternative was worse. The alternative was letting him get away with it. I need to know the truth, I told Vincent, whatever it costs. Vincent's retainer was $5,000 up front, with additional costs for document analysis, surveillance, and expert consultations. It represented nearly my entire savings account, money I'd been setting aside for a down payment on my own place. But I paid it without hesitation. The hardest part wasn't the financial sacrifice. It was the reaction from people who'd known our family for years. When I mentioned my concerns to Grandma's longtime neighbor, Mrs. Chin, she looked at me like I'd suggested Tyler was a serial killer. Your brother was devoted to Rose, she said, shaking her head sadly. He moved back to Portland specifically to care for her. You were always so busy with work, Alice. Maybe you just didn't see how much she'd changed. Her words stung because they contained a grain of truth. I had been busy. I had trusted Tyler to handle things I should have been more involved with. But that didn't mean I was wrong about what I felt in my gut. Vincent warned me that family and friends often resist the idea that a seemingly devoted caregiver could be an abuser. People want to believe that love and family bonds protect against this kind of exploitation, he explained. The reality is that perpetrators often present themselves as the hero of the story. They're the one making sacrifices, handling the difficult responsibilities, dealing with a difficult elderly person. It's a very effective cover point 2 weeks into the investigation. Vincent called with his preliminary findings. What he told me made my hands shake so badly I had to sit down on my kitchen floor. Alice, we need to meet in person. What I found goes beyond changing a will. We're looking at systematic financial abuse going back at least 18 months, possibly longer. And there are inconsistencies in your grandmother's medical records that concern me. That night, I barely slept. Part of me wanted to be wrong about Tyler, but a larger part of me was grimly satisfied that my instincts had been correct. Grandma Rose deserved justice, even if it came too late to help her. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years and drove to Vincent's office in Northwest Portland. What he showed me would change everything I thought I knew about my brother and the last months of my grandmother's life. That Vincent's office occupied the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse in the Pearl District, with exposed brick walls lined with filing cabinets and multiple computer monitors displaying financial documents. When I arrived, he had spread dozens of papers across a conference table like evidence from a crime scene. I'm going to walk you through what I found chronologically, he said, gesturing for me to sit across from him. But I need to warn you, this is going to be difficult to process. Take breaks if you need them. The first document he showed me was a bank statement from Grandma's primary checking account, dated 15 months before her death. The balance showed $47,000, consistent with her Social Security payments and modest pension. But starting in month 14, a pattern emerged that made my stomach clench. Look at these withdrawals, Vincent said, pointing to a series of entries. $500 here, $800 there, always just under the amount that would trigger automatic bank notifications. And look at the signatures on the withdrawal slips. He placed photocopies of the slips next to samples of Grandma's legitimate signature from earlier documents. Even to my untrained eye, the differences were obvious. The forged signatures were shaky, uncertain, lacking the confident flourishes that had characterized Grandma's handwriting for decades. Tyler was careful, Vincent continued. He varied the amounts and timing to avoid detection, but he got sloppy toward the end, probably because your grandmother's condition was deteriorating and he felt more confident. The bank record showed that over 18 months, Tyler had systematically drained nearly $73,000 from Grandma's accounts. But the financial theft was only the beginning. Vincent pulled out a thick folder containing medical records he'd obtained through his contacts at various Portland healthcare facilities. Your grandmother was prescribed lorazepam for anxiety 6 months before her death. The prescription was filled regularly, but here's what's interesting. Her primary care physician, Dr. Martinez, told me he only prescribed a very low dose for occasional use. He showed me pharmacy records indicating that the prescriptions were being filled at maximum frequency, with early refill requests that were consistently approved. Someone was giving your grandmother significantly more medication than prescribed. Benzodiazepines like lorazepam can cause confusion, memory problems, and increase compliance in elderly patients, especially when combined with her other medications. The medical evidence painted a horrifying picture of systematic drugging designed to make Grandma more malleable and less likely to question Tyler's control over her affairs. But Vincent wasn't finished. The most damaging evidence is this, he said, pulling out a manila envelope. Your grandmother apparently had a security system installed 8 months before her death. Tyler told the installation company it was for her protection, especially given her increasing confusion. What he didn't realize was that the system included internal cameras with cloud storage. Why hands were shaking as Vincent opened his laptop and pulled up a video file dated 3 months before Grandma's death. The footage showed the interior of her kitchen, where she sat at the familiar wooden table where we'd shared countless meals. Tyler entered the frame carrying a pill organizer and a glass of water. He set both in front of Grandma, who looked confused and disoriented. "Time for your medicine," Tyler said, his voice artificially cheerful. "I already took pills this morning," Grandma replied, her words slightly slurred. "And oh, you didn't, Grandma. Remember? We talked about this. The doctor says you need to take them twice a day now to help with your memory." I watched in horror as my brother placed additional pills in Grandma's palm, far more than should have been in a single dose. She looked at them uncertainly, then at Tyler's face, which had hardened with impatience. "Take them, Grandma." "I don't have time to argue about this." The elderly woman who had raised us both, who had taught Tyler to ride a bicycle and helped him with homework every night after our parents died, looked up at him with the trust of a confused child. She swallowed the pills without further protest. Vincent fast-forwarded through several more clips showing similar scenes. In each one, Tyler's demeanor became increasingly controlling and dismissive. In one particularly disturbing video from just 3 weeks before her death, he was shown berating Grandma for asking questions about her bank statements. "You don't need to worry about money anymore," Tyler told her, his voice sharp with irritation. "I'm handling everything. You just need to focus on getting better and stop asking questions about things you don't understand." The woman on the screen looked smaller somehow, diminished in a way that went beyond physical frailty. This wasn't the strong, sharp grandmother I remembered from my childhood. This was a victim, but the most devastating evidence was a conversation recorded just 2 weeks before Grandma's death. Tyler was on the phone with someone, walking through the house while Grandma napped in her chair. He didn't realize the security system was capturing audio as well as video. "Yeah, I know it's taking longer than we planned," Tyler was saying to whoever was on the other end. "But the old lady is being stubborn about the will. Elena thinks we need another week or 2 before she's compliant enough to sign the new documents." Elena? I'd never heard that name before, but Vincent clearly had. "Elena Rodriguez," he said, pulling out another folder. "She's a paralegal who was fired from a downtown law firm 2 years ago for forging client signatures on estate documents. She's been working with Tyler for at least the past year, helping him create fraudulent legal documents for elderly clients." The scope of what I was learning kept expanding. This wasn't just about my inheritance, or even just about Grandma. Tyler and Elena had been running a sophisticated elder abuse operation, targeting wealthy elderly residents throughout Portland's West Side neighborhoods. Vincent showed me evidence linking Tyler to at least 4 other cases where elderly homeowners had mysteriously changed their wills in favor of previously estranged or distant relatives. In each case, Tyler had inserted himself as a helpful caregiver or family friend, gaining the victim's trust before systematically isolating them and manipulating their mental state. The pattern is always the same, Vincent explained. Tyler identifies elderly people with valuable assets and limited family oversight. He volunteers to help with errands, bill paying, or other tasks. Once he's established trust, Elena creates the legal documents and Tyler uses a combination of medication manipulation and psychological pressure to get them signed. The investigation had revealed that Tyler's caregiving of Grandma wasn't born from love or family obligation. It was a calculated predatory scheme that had been evolving for years, with my grandmother as both victim and testing ground for increasingly sophisticated techniques. As Vincent continued explaining the evidence, I felt a cold fury building in my chest. Tyler hadn't just stolen my inheritance. He'd tortured and exploited the woman who'd saved us both, turning her final months into a nightmare of confusion and fear. But there was still more to uncover. The financial records Vincent had traced revealed connections to gambling debts, loan sharks, and a network of criminals that extended far beyond Portland. What had started as investigation into a changed will was becoming something that would require federal intervention. Alice, Vincent said quietly, closing the laptop after showing me the final security video. What your brother did to your grandmother is just the tip of the iceberg. We need to contact the FBI. The FBI field office in Northwest Portland looked exactly like what you'd expect from a federal building. Concrete, glass, and an atmosphere of serious business that made my palms sweat as Vincent and I waited to meet with Special Agent Rebecca Torres from the Financial Crimes Unit. Agent Torres was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail as Vincent presented our evidence. She listened without interruption while he walked through the timeline of Tyler's fraud, occasionally making notes in a leather portfolioed MR. Chin, you've done excellent work here, she said when Vincent finished his presentation. What you've documented aligns with a broader investigation we've been conducting into elder financial abuse networks in the Pacific Northwest. Your brother's name has come up in connection with several other cases. Why stomach dropped. Other cases? Agent Torres opened a file folder and spread out photographs of elderly faces I didn't recognize. Over the past 18 months, we've identified at least 12 victims in Portland, Eugene, and Salem who appear to have been targeted by the same operation. The total losses exceed $2.8 million. She pointed to a photo of a distinguished-looking man in his 70s, Harold Brennan, a retired Boeing engineer in Hillsborough. Last year, he suddenly changed his will to leave his $1.2 million estate to a nephew he'd never mentioned before. The nephew turned out to be Tyler, operating under the assumed identity of Harold's late sister's son. The photograph of Harold reminded me painfully of Grandma Rose. The same intelligent eyes, the same dignified bearing of someone who'd worked hard their entire life and deserved to enjoy their golden years in peace. Agent Torres continued through the photos, each one representing another victim of Tyler's network. Margaret Chin, no relation to your investigator here, was a retired teacher in Southeast Portland. Elena Rodriguez convinced her that her own children were trying to steal her money and that she needed to protect her assets by transferring them to a trust managed by Tyler. The scope was staggering. Tyler hadn't just been an opportunistic thief targeting our grandmother. He'd been running a sophisticated criminal enterprise with multiple victims, false identities, and a network of accomplices. How long has this been going on? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. We believe at least 3 years, Agent Torres replied, but it may have started even earlier. Elena Rodriguez has been connected to similar schemes in California and Arizona before moving to Oregon. She's been teaching Tyler increasingly sophisticated techniques for psychological manipulation and document forgery. Vincent leaned forward in his chair. Agent Torres, there's something else. When I was tracing Tyler's financial records, I found some concerning discrepancies related to Alice and Tyler's parents' life insurance settlements. I felt my blood turn to ice water. What about my parents? Agent Torres exchanged a glance with Vincent before opening another section of her file. Alice, I need to ask you some questions about the period immediately following your parents' death. How much do you remember about the insurance process and settlement? Not much, I admitted. I was 12. Tyler was 16, so he was more involved with the legal stuff. Grandma handled most of it, but Tyler helped with paperwork and meetings since he was older. You remember the amount of the settlement? I thought back to those awful months after the accident. Tyler told me it was about $50,000, split between us. He said most of it went to legal fees and funeral costs, and Grandma invested the rest for our college funds. Vincent pulled out a document I hadn't seen before Alice. I obtained copies of the actual insurance settlement through my contacts at the State Insurance Commission. Your parents had 3 separate life insurance policies totaling $850,000. The room seemed to tilt around me. That's impossible. Tyler said Tyler lied. Agent Torres said gently. According to our investigation, he and Elena created fraudulent legal documents claiming power of attorney over your financial affairs when you were still a minor. They siphoned off the majority of your inheritance over a period of 2 years, using a combination of forged signatures and fabricated expenses. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that I couldn't process it all at once. Tyler hadn't just stolen from Grandma. He'd been stealing from me for over a decade, taking money that should have paid for my college education, my first apartment, my entire adult life. There's more, Vincent said quietly. The gambling debts I mentioned earlier? Tyler owes approximately $340,000 to a loan shark operation run by the Kozlov organization. They're connected to Russian organized crime groups operating throughout the Pacific coast. Agent Torres nodded grimly. That's actually how Tyler first came to our attention. The Kozlov organization has been laundering money through real estate transactions involving elderly victims' property. Tyler's scheme provided a steady stream of valuable Portland homes that could be flipped quickly for cash. The criminal network was vast and sophisticated. Tyler would identify targets, Elena would create the fraudulent legal documents, and the Kozlov organization would handle the money laundering through shell companies and rapid property sales. My grandmother's house, which should have been my inheritance, was already being prepared for sale to a buyer connected to the criminal network. But why the celebration party? I asked. If Tyler was involved with dangerous criminals and federal investigators were closing in, why draw attention to himself? Agent Torres smiled for the first time since I'd met her. Arrogance. Tyler believes he's been too clever to get caught. The party is his way of celebrating not just your inheritance, but the success of the entire operation. He's invited several of his other victims' family members, people who still believe his cover stories about being a devoted caregiver. He's planning to gloat in front of all the families he's destroyed, Vincent added. It's a power move designed to show everyone that he's untouchable. Agent Torres leaned forward, her expression intense. Alice, we'd like your permission to use Tyler's party as an opportunity to expose the entire network. We have enough evidence to arrest him and Elena, but we want to recover assets for all the victims and gather testimony that will help us prosecute the money laundering operation. The plan she outlined was both elegant and devastating. I would attend Tyler's celebration as planned, wearing a wire to record any admissions he might make. At a predetermined signal, FBI agents would move in to make arrests, but not before Tyler had a chance to incriminate himself in front of witnesses who could testify to his admissions. We'll also have agents positioned to arrest Elena simultaneously at her apartment, along with 3 other associates we've identified through surveillance. The timing needs to be perfect to prevent anyone from destroying evidence or fleeing As Agent Torres explained the details, I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. For months, I'd felt powerless, victimized by someone who was supposed to protect me. Now I had the opportunity to not only get justice for Grandma and myself, but to help recover stolen assets for a dozen other families Tyler had destroyed. What about the dangerous criminals Tyler owes money to? I asked. Won't they come after me if I'm responsible for disrupting their operation? The Kozlov organization will actually be relieved to have Tyler out of the picture. Agent Torres explained. He's become a liability to them. Too visible, too arrogant, too likely to draw law enforcement attention. They'll write off his debts and find new partners for their money laundering operation. Vincent gathered the evidence files into neat stacks. Alice, you should know that this investigation is going to get significant media attention. Elder abuse cases involving this amount of money and this many victims always do. Are you prepared for that level of public scrutiny? I thought about Grandma Rose, about the confusion and fear in her eyes during those security camera videos. I thought about Harold Brennan and Margaret Chen and all the other elderly victims whose families still didn't know they'd been targeted by criminals. Let them see it all, I said finally. Every detail, every victim, every dollar stolen. People need to know how sophisticated these predators have become. Agent Torres stood and shook my hand. The party is in 3 days. That gives us time to get the surveillance equipment ready and brief you on what we need you to do. Tyler thinks he's throwing a victory party, but he's actually planning his own arrest. Walking out of that federal building, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Grandma's death: hope. Tyler had spent years making me feel powerless, manipulated, and isolated. In 3 days, I was going to return the favor in front of everyone who mattered to him. The next 72 hours required the kind of precision planning I'd never attempted before. Agent Torres had made it clear that one mistake could compromise not just Tyler's arrest, but the entire investigation into the elder abuse network. 12 families were counting on us to get this right. Vincent and I met at a coffee shop in Hawthorne the morning after our FBI briefing. He slid a manila envelope across the small table between us, glancing around to make sure we weren't being overheard. Inside were photographs, financial documents, and a detailed timeline of Tyler's criminal activities that would serve as my backup evidence. If something goes wrong at the party, Vincent explained quietly, if Tyler gets suspicious or the FBI can't move in as planned, you need to be prepared to present this evidence yourself. These documents prove everything: the forged signatures, the medication manipulation, the stolen insurance money. All of it that I studied the photographs, many of which I was seeing for the first time. Tyler meeting with Elena at various Portland locations over the past 2 years. Bank deposit slips showing stolen funds being transferred through shell companies. Even surveillance photos of Tyler entering Harold Brennan's house under false pretenses. The weight of evidence was overwhelming, but Vincent wasn't finished. Alice, there's something else you need to know. Agent Torres didn't want to tell you yesterday because she was worried it might compromise your ability to function at the party. My stomach clenched. What now? Tyler's been under FBI surveillance for 6 weeks. They have recordings of phone calls he's made discussing you specifically. Vincent pulled out a small digital recorder and placed it on the table between us. You need to hear this, but it's going to hurt. The recording was from a call Tyler had made 3 days after Grandma's funeral. His voice was cold, calculating in a way that made my skin crawl. The sister won't be a problem, Tyler was saying to someone, presumably Elena. She's too busy playing nurse to pay attention to financial details. Besides, she always believed whatever I told her growing up. She's naive that way. Elena's voice responded. What if she gets suspicious about the will change? Tyler laughed, a sound completely devoid of warmth. Alice has always been a people pleaser. She'll convince herself that Grandma must have had good reasons for changing her mind. And even if she doesn't, what's she going to do? Hire a lawyer with her nurse's salary? The conversation continued for another few minutes, with Tyler describing me as weak and easily manipulated, someone who would accept whatever story I give her because she's desperate to maintain family connections. Vincent turned off the recorder as tears blurred my vision. Hearing Tyler's complete contempt for me, his casual dismissal of my intelligence and strength, hurt worse than any of his thefts. This wasn't just about money or property. Tyler genuinely despised me while pretending to care about our family bond. I know it's painful, Vincent said gently. But Agent Torres wanted you to hear this because Tyler's arrogance is actually our greatest advantage. He doesn't think you're capable of fighting back, which means he won't see our investigation coming. That afternoon, Agent Torres met me at a secure location in an unmarked government building downtown. The surveillance equipment was smaller than I had expected. A tiny microphone disguised as a piece of jewelry and a recording device no larger than a credit card that would fit discreetly in my purse. The microphone has a range of about 30 feet and will pick up conversations even in a crowded room, she explained, showing me how to activate it. The backup recorder is voice-activated, so it will capture everything automatically. We'll have agents positioned throughout the country club, but they'll be maintaining distance until we give the signal. She walked me through various scenarios we might encounter. What to do if Tyler became suspicious. How to guide conversation toward topics that would provide incriminating evidence. Emergency protocols if anything went wrong. Remember, Alice, your primary job is to stay safe and act natural. Tyler invited you to this party because he wants to gloat. Let him. Give him enough rope to hang himself. The most challenging part of the preparation was emotional rather than technical. I spent that evening at David's apartment, trying to process the reality that I was about to destroy my only remaining family member. David had been my closest friend since nursing school, and he was one of the few people who knew the full scope of what Tyler had done. "Are you having second thoughts?" he asked as we sat on his couch, sharing a bottle of wine that was supposed to calm my nerves. "Not about stopping him," I replied honestly, "but about what comes after. Once this is over, Tyler will be in federal prison, and I'll be completely alone. No parents, no grandmother, no brother." David was quiet for a long moment. "Alice, you've been alone for years. Tyler stopped being your family the moment he chose to prey on Grandma Rose. What you're doing isn't destroying a family, it's acknowledging that he already destroyed it." His words hit home in a way I hadn't expected. Tyler had never been the protective older brother I'd wanted him to be. Even as children, he'd been selfish and manipulative, always finding ways to make himself the center of attention while portraying me as the burden. I'd spent years making excuses for his behavior, attributing it to grief over our parents' death or the pressure of being the older sibling. The truth was simpler and more painful. Tyler was exactly who he'd always been. I'd just been too desperate for family connection to see it clearly. Vincent called that night with final updates from the FBI surveillance team. "Tyler's been making calls all day, confirming details for tomorrow night. He's excited, Alice. Really excited. Agent Torres says his arrogance level is exactly where they want it for maximum self-incrimination." As I fell asleep that night, I tried to channel the strength I'd seen in Grandma Rose throughout my childhood. She'd raised 2 orphan grandchildren while working full-time and managing a household. She'd survived the Great Depression, World War II, and the loss of her only son. If she could handle all of that with grace and determination, I could handle one evening of confronting the person who'd tortured her final months. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. This wasn't just about revenge or justice for me. This was about honoring the memory of a woman who deserved so much better than what Tyler had given her. It was about protecting other elderly victims from the predatory network Tyler had helped create. Most importantly, it was about reclaiming my own power after years of being dismissed and underestimated. Tyler thought I was too weak to fight back. Tomorrow night, he was going to learn just how wrong he'd been. The invitation arrived on cream-colored cardstock with gold-embossed lettering that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Tyler had spared no expense in creating the perfect announcement of his victory over me and everyone else he'd deceived. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the legacy of Rose Mitchell," it read, in honor of her lasting gift to family and community. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Tyler was literally celebrating the legacy of a woman he'd spent months drugging and manipulating. The event details made my anger burn even hotter. Cocktail reception at the prestigious Oswego Lake Country Club, featuring a selection of Rose's favorite wines and/or d'oeuvres inspired by her famous recipes. Tyler was turning Grandma's memory into a themed party for Portland's social elite, people who'd never met her but would attend because the venue and implied wealth level made it a worthwhile networking opportunity. When Tyler called to personally ensure my attendance, I could hear the smugness in his voice from the moment I answered the phone. "Alice, I hope you got the invitation. I know this might be emotional for you, but I really want you there." Grandma would have wanted the whole family together to celebrate her life. The manipulation was so blatant it was almost impressive. Tyler was reframing his theft celebration as a memorial service, positioning himself as the devoted grandson honoring our grandmother's wishes. Anyone listening would think he was being considerate of my feelings rather than rubbing salt in my wounds. "It sounds lovely, Tyler," I replied, keeping my voice carefully neutral. I wouldn't miss it. There was a pause, as if he'd expected more resistance. "Really? You're not upset about the Will situation anymore?" This was my opportunity to feed his arrogance, exactly what Agent Torres had coached me to do. "I've been thinking about what you said after the lawyer's office. Maybe Grandma did have good reasons for changing her mind. You were taking care of her those final months, dealing with all the difficult stuff while I was working. It makes sense she'd want to recognize that I could practically hear Tyler's chest puffing with pride. I'm glad you see it that way, Alice. It means a lot to have your support. There are going to be some important people at this event. City council members, business leaders, people who knew Grandma through her volunteer work. I want them to see that our family is united." The guest list he described was strategic rather than sentimental. Tyler wasn't inviting people who'd loved Grandma Rose. He was inviting people who could enhance his social standing and potentially provide future criminal opportunities. The country club event was as much about establishing his credibility in Portland's wealthy community as it was about celebrating his successful theft. "Should I bring anything?" I asked, playing the role of the dutiful younger sister. "Just yourself. Oh, and Alice? You might want to dress up a bit. This is a pretty upscale crowd." The condescension in his voice was exactly what I'd expected. Tyler had always treated me like an embarrassing relative who needed guidance on appropriate behavior. The irony that he was lecturing me on respectability while running a criminal enterprise wasn't lost on me. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen, holding that expensive invitation and marveling at Tyler's complete lack of self-awareness. He genuinely believed he'd gotten away with everything. More than that, he was proud of what he'd accomplished. That evening, I drove to Nordstrom and bought the most expensive black dress I'd ever owned. It was elegant, sophisticated, and exactly the kind of outfit that would help me blend in with Portland's social elite. More importantly, it had the perfect neckline to showcase the piece of jewelry I planned to wear. Grandma Rose's pearl necklace, the one Tyler didn't know existed because she'd hidden it specifically for me. The necklace had been Grandma's wedding gift from our grandfather, worn on every important occasion throughout their 53-year marriage. She'd given it to me 2 years before her death, during one of our quiet Sunday afternoon visits. "This goes to you, Alice," she'd said, fastening the clasp around my neck. "Not because you're a girl, but because you understand what love looks like. These pearls have witnessed more genuine affection than most people see in a lifetime. Tomorrow night they would witness justice, the morning of Tyler's celebration." Agent Torres called with final operational details that made the scope of the evening's plan clear. This wasn't just about arresting Tyler and Elena. The FBI was coordinating a multi-location takedown designed to dismantle the entire elder abuse network in one coordinated strike. "We'll have agents positioned at 6 different locations throughout Portland," she explained. "Tyler and Elena will be arrested at the country club, but will simultaneously be executing search warrants on their homes, Elena's office, and 2 storage units, where we believe they've been keeping forged documents. The timing had to be precise. FBI agents would be posing as country club staff and guests, recording everything while remaining invisible until the moment they moved in for arrests. Vincent would be attending as my guest, providing backup support and additional witness testimony. Alice, I need you to understand something, Agent Torres continued. Once this starts, there's no going back. Tyler will know you were working with us, and he'll probably figure out that you've known about his crimes for months. Are you prepared for his reaction? I thought about the security camera footage of Tyler berating Grandma Rose, about the phone recording where he dismissed me as weak and easily manipulated. I'm ready. The surveillance equipment fitting took place at Vincent's office 3 hours before the party. The microphone was cleverly disguised as a decorative clasp on Grandma's pearl necklace, while the backup recording device fit perfectly in a hidden compartment of my black clutch purse. Test, test, I said softly, and Vincent nodded as the equipment registered my voice clearly. Remember, you don't need to push for confessions, he reminded me. Tyler's arrogance will do most of the work for us. Just be yourself and let him talk. David arrived at my apartment an hour before I needed to leave, bringing moral support and a bottle of wine for courage. He'd offered to attend the party with me, but we decided his presence might make Tyler suspicious. Instead, he would wait at my apartment for news of how everything went. You look beautiful, he said as I did a final check of my appearance in the hallway mirror. Grandma Rose would be proud. The black dress fit perfectly, and the pearl necklace caught the light in a way that felt almost like Grandma's blessing. For the first time in months, I looked like someone who belonged in Portland's social elite rather than someone who'd been excluded from IT. As I drove toward Lake Oswego, I thought about all the victims Tyler's network had destroyed. Harold Brennan, who'd lost his life savings to a fake nephew. Margaret Chen, convinced her own children were trying to steal from her. 12 families whose trust had been weaponized against them by sophisticated criminals. But I also thought about the other families who would be protected because of tonight's operation. Elderly people Tyler would never get the chance to target. Money that would be returned to rightful heirs. A criminal network that would be dismantled before it could spread to other cities. The Oswego Lake Country Club sat on the shore of one of Portland's most exclusive neighborhoods. Its manicured grounds and elegant architecture, exactly the kind of setting Tyler would choose to showcase his newfound wealth. Valet attendants took my keys with professional courtesy, and I walked through the marble-floored lobby feeling like I was entering a battlefield disguised as a social event. Tyler stood near the entrance to the main reception hall, greeting guests with the practiced charm of someone who'd spent months perfecting his respectable facade. When he saw me, his smile widened with what looked like genuine pleasure. Alice, you look incredible. I'm so glad you came to S. He leaned in to hug me. The microphone hidden in my necklace began recording everything. The final phase of our investigation had begun. The Oswego Lake Country Club's main reception hall had been transformed into Tyler's vision of sophisticated elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over round tables draped in white linen, each centerpiece featuring roses, a detail that made my chest tighten with anger. He was using Grandma's favorite flowers as decorations for his theft celebration. The crowd was exactly what Tyler had promised, Portland's social elite mingling with champagne flutes and practiced smiles. I recognized several faces from the society pages of the Oregonian. City council members, real estate developers, and the kind of wealthy retirees who made perfect targets for Tyler's criminal network. The irony wasn't lost on me that half the people in this room could be his next victims. Tyler guided me through the crowd with his hand on my elbow, his grip just tight enough to feel controlling. Alice, I want you to meet some people, he said, steering me toward a group of well-dressed older couples near the bar. This is my sister I was telling you about. She's a nurse at OHSU. The way he introduced me felt dismissive, reducing my identity to a job title while positioning himself as the successful one worthy of their attention. But I smiled and played my role, making small talk about healthcare while internally cataloging the faces around me for Agent Torres's later reference. Your brother speaks so highly of you. said an elegant woman with silver hair and diamond earrings that probably cost more than my car. "He's told us how supportive you've been during this difficult transition after your grandmother's passing that I nearly choked on my champagne." Tyler had been spinning stories about my support to these people, creating a narrative where I was the understanding sister who approved of his inheritance windfall. The manipulation was so complete that even strangers believed I'd endorsed his theft. "Tyler's always been good at handling difficult situations," I replied carefully, the microphone in my necklace picking up every word. "He has a talent for getting what he wants." Tyler's smile faltered slightly, as if he wasn't sure whether my comment was compliment or criticism. But before he could respond, the crowd began moving toward the main dining area, where he'd apparently planned some kind of presentation. As we walked, I caught glimpses of people I recognized from Vincent's investigation photos. There was Harold Brennan's daughter, looking uncomfortable but attending out of what appeared to be social obligation. Margaret Chen's son stood near the windows, presumably still believing Tyler's lies about protecting his mother from financial predators. The weight of carrying so many families' pain while maintaining my facade was becoming overwhelming. These people had no idea they were celebrating the man who destroyed their loved ones. Some of them probably still considered Tyler a hero for his supposed caregiving. That a small podium had been set up at the front of the room, complete with a microphone and a large photograph of Grandma Rose that made my heart ache. She looked radiant in the picture, probably taken during one of our summer garden parties before Tyler's manipulation began. Seeing her face displayed as a prop in his victory celebration felt like a violation. Tyler moved toward the podium while servers circulated with fresh champagne. The crowd quieted expectantly, clearly anticipating some kind of speech or toast. This was the moment Agent Torres had prepared me for, when Tyler's arrogance would be at its peak and his guard completely down. But as I watched him adjust the microphone and smile at his audience of Portland's elite, a wave of doubt crashed over me. Once I spoke, there would be no taking it back. Tyler would go to prison, our family name would be destroyed, and I would be responsible for the public humiliation of the only relative I had left. For a heartbeat, I considered walking away, just leaving the country club and letting Tyler have his victory. It would be easier than destroying what remained of our family connection. Even if that connection was built on lies and manipulation, then I remembered the security footage of him drugging Grandma Rose, the phone recording where he'd called me weak and naive, the 12 other families he'd destroyed with Elena's help, the elderly victims who would never get justice if I remained silent. Tyler raised his champagne glass, and the crowd followed suit, creating a sea of crystal catching the chandelier light. This was it, the moment that would change everything. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tyler began, his voice carrying easily through the hushed room. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate the remarkable legacy of my grandmother, Rose Mitchell." The crowd murmured appreciative responses while I positioned myself where the hidden FBI agents could see me clearly. Vincent stood near the back of the room, his subtle nod confirming that everything was being recorded. "Grandma Rose was more than just a family matriarch," Tyler continued, his voice taking on the practiced sincerity of a politician. "She was a pillar of our community, a woman who understood the importance of family loyalty and wise financial planning. Her final gift to me represents not just an inheritance, but a responsibility to honor her values and continue her philanthropic work." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Tyler was literally standing in front of Grandma's photograph while describing values he'd systematically destroyed through months of abuse and manipulation. Several people in the crowd nodded approvingly, clearly moved by his apparent devotion. That Rose's decision to entrust me with her estate wasn't made lightly, Tyler said, his eyes briefly meeting mine across the room. She spent her final months evaluating our family dynamics, considering who would best preserve her legacy for future generations. I'm honored that she chose to place her confidence in me. That was my cue. The moment Agent Torres had coached me to wait for, when Tyler had publicly claimed Grandma's mental competence, while simultaneously describing the very decision-making process his criminal network had manipulated, I stood up slowly, my legs steadier than I had expected. The movement caught Tyler's attention mid-sentence, and his practiced smile wavered slightly when he saw my expression. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet room. "But I think everyone here deserves to know the truth about how Tyler really obtained this inheritance." The silence that followed was absolute. Tyler's face went through several expressions: confusion, annoyance, then something approaching panic as he realized I wasn't playing the role of supportive sister anymore. "Alice, what are you doing?" he said into the microphone, trying to maintain his composure. "This isn't the time for family drama." "You're right, Tyler. This is about much more than family drama." I reached into my clutch and pulled out the folder Vincent had prepared, my hands surprisingly steady. "This is about systematic elder abuse, forged legal documents, and a criminal conspiracy that has victimized at least 12 families throughout Portland." A ripple of shocked murmurs went through the crowd. Tyler's face had gone pale, but he was still trying to control the narrative. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for my sister's emotional outburst. She's had difficulty accepting Grandma's final wishes, and I think the stress has been overwhelming for her." The dismissive tone was exactly what I'd expected, Tyler's instinctive response to minimize and gaslight when challenged. "But this time I had evidence to back up my accusations, Harold Brennan," I said, addressing the crowd directly while looking at Harold's daughter. "Margaret Chin, Robert Williams, Elizabeth Foster. These are just some of the elderly victims Tyler and his partner, Elena Rodriguez, have been systematically defrauding over the past 3 years." I opened the folder and held up bank records showing forged signatures. "Tyler convinced these people to change their wills by using a combination of medication manipulation and psychological abuse. My grandmother wasn't his first victim. She was simply his most profitable." Tyler grabbed the microphone stand, his composure completely shattered. "This is insane. Alice, you're having some kind of breakdown. These people don't know what you're talking about." But the crowd's attention had shifted entirely to me, and several faces showed recognition when I mentioned the victims' names. Harold's daughter had gone white as paper, while Margaret Chen's son was staring at Tyler with dawning horror. 3 weeks before our grandmother died. I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. Tyler was recorded on her home security system saying, "The old lady is being stubborn about the will. Elena thinks we need another week or 2 before she's compliant enough to sign the new documents." The gasps from the audience were audible now. Tyler lunged toward me, reaching for the folder, but Vincent was already moving through the crowd to intercede. "That's enough," Tyler shouted, abandoning all pretense of control. "You have no idea what you're talking about, Alice. You're going to destroy everything over your jealousy and your inability to accept that Grandma loved me more than you." His words hung in the air like a confession. The mask of devoted grandson had completely slipped, revealing the manipulative predator underneath. The crowd was backing away from him now, their faces showing disgust and alarm. That's when Agent Torres and 3 other FBI agents entered the room, their badges clearly visible as they moved purposefully toward Tyler. The timing was perfect. Tyler had just publicly revealed his sense of entitlement and his contempt for both me and Grandma Rose. "Tyler Mitchell," Agent Torres announced, her voice carrying easily through the stunned silence. "You're under arrest for elder abuse, financial fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering." The room erupted in chaos. People were pulling out phones to record the arrest, while others pushed toward the exits. Tyler stood frozen at the podium as Agent Torres approached, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and finally a desperate calculation. "This is a setup!" he screamed as the handcuffs clicked into place. "Alice planned this whole thing. She's been working with them to frame me." Agent Torres continued reading him his rights, while 2 other agents secured the scene and began collecting evidence. In the background, I could see country club staff trying to manage the crowd of shocked guests, many of whom were now approaching me with questions about their own elderly relatives. A.S. Tyler was being led away. He caught my eye one final time. The look he gave me was pure hatred, completely stripped of any pretense of family affection. "You have no idea what you've just done," he hissed. "No idea who you're destroying, but I did know. I was destroying a criminal who had preyed on vulnerable elderly people, including the grandmother who had raised us both. I was dismantling a network that had stolen millions of dollars from families throughout the Pacific Northwest. Most importantly, I was finally standing up to the person who had spent years making me feel powerless and insignificant. Tyler's arrest was just the beginning. Elena and the rest of their network were being rounded up simultaneously across Portland, their criminal enterprise finally exposed. The country club had transformed into a crime scene within minutes. FBI agents were interviewing guests while Vincent worked with Agent Torres to secure the evidence I'd presented. The elegant reception had become a chaotic mix of law enforcement activity and social media frenzy as guests live-streamed Tyler's arrest to their followers, and my phone was buzzing nonstop with notifications. But I ignored it in favor of speaking with the victims' family members who'd approached me after Tyler's arrest. Harold Brennan's daughter, Patricia, was crying as she described the confusion her father had experienced in his final months. "He kept asking about a nephew named Tyler," she said through her tears. "We thought it was dementia, but he was so insistent that this person was helping him with his finances. We never imagined someone would actually be taking advantage of his trust." Margaret Chen's son was angrier than sad, his face flushed with rage as he processed what Tyler's network had done to his mother. She kept telling us we were trying to steal from her, that only Tyler understood her situation. We thought she was becoming paranoid because of her age. God, we should have investigated instead of just accepting it. Each conversation was heartbreaking, but necessary. These families needed to understand that their loved ones hadn't been losing their minds. They'd been systematically manipulated by sophisticated criminals who specialized in exploiting trust and affection. Agent Torres found me near the bar, where I was trying to process everything that had just happened. "Alice, you did exactly what we needed you to do. Tyler's public statements, combined with the evidence Vincent gathered, will make this case airtight. What happens now?" I asked, suddenly feeling exhausted by the adrenaline crash. "Tyler and Elena will be held without bail pending trial. We've recovered documents from their storage units that connect them to at least 15 additional victims across 3 states. This case is going to result in federal charges that carry significant prison time." The media attention was already overwhelming. My phone showed missed calls from local news stations, and Vincent had fielded requests from reporters who'd somehow gotten his number. The story of a nurse exposing her brother's elder abuse network was exactly the kind of narrative that would capture public attention. But the most difficult moment came when Tyler's lawyer arrived at the country club and approached me with a final message from my brother. The attorney, a nervous-looking man in an expensive suit, seemed uncomfortable delivering Tyler's words. "Your brother wanted me to tell you that he forgives you for tonight, and that if you recant your statements and claim you were emotionally unstable, he might be willing to share part of the inheritance with you after this misunderstanding is resolved." The audacity was stunning. Even in handcuffs, facing federal charges, Tyler was still trying to manipulate me. He genuinely believed that I'd exposed his crimes out of greed rather than justice, and that the right financial offer could convince me to help him escape consequences. "Tell my brother," I replied carefully, aware that the lawyer would report every word back to Tyler, that Grandma Rose would be proud of what I did tonight. "And tell him that I finally understand the difference between family and blood relation. As I walked out of the Oswego Lake Country Club for the last time. Reporters were already gathering in the parking lot. Vincent took my elbow protectively as camera flashes went off around us. But I wasn't afraid of the attention anymore. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Not the grieving granddaughter who'd been dismissed and manipulated, but a strong woman who'd fought back against injustice and won. Tyler's criminal network was destroyed. 12 families would get their stolen assets back, and elderly people throughout Portland would be safer because of what we'd accomplished. The revenge was complete, but more importantly, justice had been served 0.8 months after Tyler's arrest at the country club. I sat in the federal courthouse in downtown Portland, watching my brother receive a sentence of 12 years in federal prison. The judge's words were measured but firm as she outlined the scope of his crimes and their impact on vulnerable elderly victims throughout the Pacific Northwest.Mr. Mitchell, your systematic exploitation of elderly individuals represents one of the most comprehensive elder abuse cases this court has seen, Judge Patricia Williams stated. The psychological manipulation, financial fraud, and breach of trust you orchestrated caused immeasurable harm to victims and their families. Elena Rodriguez had been sentenced 2 weeks earlier to 8 years after cooperating with federal prosecutors and providing testimony against Tyler and 3 other network associates. Her cooperation had been crucial in recovering assets and identifying additional victims who might never have come forward otherwise. The asset recovery process was complex but ultimately successful. Federal agents had traced Tyler's network through multiple bank accounts, shell companies, and real estate transactions. Grandma Rose's house was returned to me, along with her jewelry collection and the 1967 Mustang. More importantly, nearly $2.3 million in stolen funds was recovered and distributed among the victim families. Harold Brennan's daughter Patricia used her father's recovered inheritance to establish a scholarship fund for nursing students, honoring her father's belief in caring for others. Margaret Chen's family donated a portion of their recovered assets to elder abuse prevention programs throughout Oregon. The case had broader implications beyond individual justice. Oregon passed new legislation requiring additional oversight for caregivers handling elderly individuals' financial affairs. Banks implemented enhanced monitoring systems for accounts belonging to seniors, and law enforcement agencies received specialized training in identifying sophisticated elder abuse schemes. Vincent's investigation work led to the discovery of similar networks operating in Washington, California, and Arizona. Federal authorities coordinated with local agencies to expose what turned out to be a nationwide criminal enterprise that had been operating for over 5 years. Tyler and Elena's Portland operation was actually part of a much larger conspiracy that had victimized hundreds of elderly people across the western United States. The media attention surrounding Tyler's trial brought national awareness to the sophistication of modern elder abuse schemes. I was interviewed by CNN, NPR, and several major newspapers about the warning signs families should watch for when elderly relatives require caregiving assistance. During Tyler's sentencing hearing, I was given the opportunity to provide a victim impact statement. Standing at that podium in front of the judge, Tyler's defense attorneys, and a courtroom full of reporters, I spoke directly to my brother for the last time. Tyler destroyed more than bank accounts and legal documents, I said, my voice steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. He destroyed the final months of our grandmother's life, turning a woman who should have been enjoying her golden years into a confused, frightened victim of the person she trusted most. Tyler never looked at me during my statement. He sat with his head down, occasionally whispering to his attorney, but showing no acknowledgement of the pain he'd caused. Even facing a decade in prison, he seemed more concerned with his legal strategy than with the human cost of his actions. The judge's final words before announcing Tyler's sentence stayed with me. Trust is the foundation of civilized society, particularly the trust between family members and between caregivers and those in their care. When that trust is weaponized for personal gain, the damage extends far beyond financial loss. Returning to Grandma Rose's Victorian house for the first time after the legal proceedings was both healing and heartbreaking. The room still held her presence. The sunroom where we'd shared countless conversations, the kitchen where she'd taught me to bake her famous apple pies, the garden she'd tended with such care throughout her 70s and 80s. But there were also reminders of Tyler's manipulation. The home office where he'd conducted his fraudulent business, the bedroom where security cameras had captured him drugging our grandmother, the dining room where he'd isolated her from friends who might have noticed her declining condition that I spent weeks going through Grandma's belongings, separating items that held genuine, sentimental value from things Tyler had used as props in his caregiver performance. Among her personal papers, I found letters she'd written but never sent, apologies to me for being confused and difficult during her final months. Reading her words, written in the shaky handwriting of someone fighting medication-induced disorientation, broke my heart all over again. The healing process wasn't linear. Some days I felt strong and vindicated, proud of my role in exposing Tyler's crimes and protecting other families. Other days I grieved not just for Grandma Rose, but for the brother I'd thought I had, even if that person had never really existed. Dr. Rachel Martinez, the therapist I began seeing 3 months after Tyler's arrest, helped me understand that it was possible to mourn the loss of a relationship while simultaneously feeling relief that an abusive dynamic had ended. You can grieve for the family you deserve to have while celebrating your courage in protecting others from harm, she explained. Building new relationships required learning to trust my instincts again. Tyler's years of manipulation had left me questioning my ability to recognize genuine care versus calculated charm. But gradually, with support from friends like David and Vincent, I began to distinguish between people who valued me and those who might see me as useful, and why work at OHSU took on new meaning as I became involved in training healthcare staff to recognize signs of elder abuse. Speaking at conferences and workshops about Tyler's case gave me a sense of purpose that extended beyond my personal healing. Every healthcare worker who learned to spot manipulation tactics was potentially protecting vulnerable patients from predatory caregivers. The advocacy work also connected me with other families who'd experienced similar betrayals. There was comfort in sharing experiences with people who understood the unique pain of being victimized by someone who should have been protective. We formed an informal support network that met monthly, offering practical advice and emotional support to families navigating the aftermath of elder abuse. 18 months after Tyler's sentencing, I made the decision to keep Grandma's house rather than sell it. The Victorian home that had been the target of his criminal scheme became my sanctuary, a place where I could honor her memory while building a life she would have been proud of. Looking back on everything that happened, I've learned that family isn't defined by shared DNA or legal obligations. Real family consists of people who show up consistently, who protect rather than exploit, who build you up instead of tearing you down for their own benefit. Tyler taught me that betrayal from someone close to you cuts deeper than any stranger's cruelty. But it also taught me that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. The woman who walked into that country club wearing Grandma's pearls and carrying evidence of criminal conspiracy was someone I'd never known I could become. The cost of standing up for truth was losing the last member of my biological family. But the value was immeasurable: justice for Grandma Rose, protection for future victims, and the discovery of my own courage and resilience. If you're watching this and you've experienced betrayal by someone who should have protected you, know that your instincts matter. Trust those feelings that tell you something isn't right, even when everyone else dismisses your concerns. I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? How did you find the strength to speak up when no one else would listen? Hit that subscribe button for more stories from his Revenge with Alice, where we explore what happens when people underestimate the quiet strength of those they've wronged. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just getting even. It's making sure they can never hurt anyone else again. Remember, you're never as powerless as someone else wants you to believe. And sometimes the people who dismiss you as weak are the ones who should be most afraid of your strength.